Barcelona. Muchísimas gracias a la Zambra Barroca, a Andreas que nos van a amenizar durante toda la noche. Me gustaría invitar, por favor, a subir a los intervinientes en la primera mesa, al presidente del Círculo de Bellas Artes, al ministro de Cultura y Deporte y a la presidenta de la Akademie de Künste. Mientras van subiendo, quiero agradecer muchísimo la presencia de todos ustedes, también la presencia de todos los que nos ven a través del streaming y agradecer también la colaboración de la Embajada Alemana, la participación, el apoyo de la Agencia Alemana para la Educación Cívica y también de la Comunidad de Madrid, así como la colaboración de Radio 3 como medio invitado. Y sin más dilación, para que comience este evento The Power of Art de la Alliance of Academies, le doy la palabra al anfitrión, al presidente del Círculo de Bellas Artes, para que dé unas palabras de bienvenida.
Juan Miguel.
Buenas tardes.
Good evening. Before anything,
gracias por estar aquí.
Thank you for being here.
Ministro de Cultura,
my dear Ministry of Culture, Miquel Iceta. Welcome, my colleague, President of the Academy of Fine Arts, Berlin, and also a partner in this Congress and this European project.
Power of Art.
The power of the
Cosa
art.
que de alguna manera han ejemplificado en este momento esta Zambra Barroca.
Of this has been this Zambra Barroca that in its quality is a great, good example precisely of what that transnational culture is all about, that hybrid culture, the culture that does acknowledge, recognize the other, not identitarian. The European Alliance of Academies, founded in 2019-2020, this joint European project has its grounds in a series of principles: solidarity, the union of art, culture, and science in Europe needs to ally itself against the attacks against values such as diversity and freedom of speech and creation, protecting the basis on which the European project is built. The manifesto that we wrote in Berlin then was the result of that first meeting in which we stressed the fact that culture and art are essential, key to the workings of democracy and social coexistence, and it advocated the defense of freedom of the arts as a precondition for a social, cultural, and political way of life. The base, the ground of democracy is that independence, that notion of freedom, and that sense of freedom, and that vocation of transnational culture. Yesterday I said that at the press conference, Hegel, Goethe, Proust, Dante, Shakespeare, Quevedo, Cervantes are just examples of what our culture is all about. There are no exclusionary cultures. Facing the risk that certain extreme right populism trying to appropriate of an identitary exclusionary concept, our alliance advocates this notion that encompasses all cultures. And along these lines, the very alliance has proven this. Some months after the meeting, the Hungarian network of academics published a manifesto of protest against the governmental policy in Hungarian University, and the Alliance joined to the protest. And Europe Day, the Alliance defended the freedom of the arts, especially in Hungary. Furthermore, the Alliance supported completely the declaration statement by John Hansen, rector of the State Arts of Prague in November 2020, protested against the persecution of students of teachers in Bielorussia, researchers about the Holocaust in Poland, also forced to rectify and
estructura mítica, un relato
contradict
nacional
themselves
en el que
to respond to a national narrative where Poland was exempt of its responsibilities in the Holocaust provoked by the Nazis. There are so many things. One of the last examples in this very circle, in this very institution, we awarded the Golden Medal to Sergio Ramírez, the writer, great writer, Cervantes Award, that has to stay in exile in a city in Madrid because
sus novelas, sus escritos
his novels, his writings are prohibited in Nicaragua, and he may end up in prison if he goes back to Nicaragua.
Que ya fue el poeta latino desterrado.
Also Ovidius, the Latin poet that had to go to exile. There are so many characters, not just in Europe, but throughout the world. Europe, America, Africa, Asia, and that's why we founded this alliance, defending transnational culture and also the freedom of creation, freedom of speech, that is the very foundation of a European identity. I would like to thank the present support of you all.
Dan presencia y dan realidad
that the presence and reality to this project initiated in Berlin by the initiative and drive of the Academy of Fine Arts in Berlin. And also,
están así que les voy a leer, y con esto voy terminando, unos párrafos de una carta que nos ha enviado el presidente del gobierno del Reino de España, en el que dice, y cito solo unas frases: el respeto de los valores y principios europeos como libertad, democracia o igualdad es una de las obligaciones primordiales de cada individuo, Estado, miembro e institución. En ese sentido, la labor que llevan a cabo el Círculo de las Artes, la Real Academia Española y las demás instituciones que conforman la Alianza Europea de las Academias resulta sustancial y enriquecedor. Desde el Gobierno de España valoramos iniciativas como esta que están llevando a cabo, en la que la cultura y principios europeos van de la mano. Fin de la cita. Y qué mejor ejemplo que tener aquí al ministro de Cultura
the best example for this is the presence of the Ministry of Culture here. Thanks a lot.
Por estas palabras. Y ahora tiene la palabra la presidenta de la Academie de Künste de Berlín, Jeanine Meerapfel, que como ha dicho el presidente es también la gran impulsora de esta Alianza Europea de las Academias.
Driver of this alliance, dear Minister Miguel Iceta,
estimado Juan Miguel,
dear Juan Miguel Hernández León, our wonderful host,
estimadas autoridades,
dear authorities,
queridos
dear
amigos de antes
friends,
y amigos de
from
ahora.
before and now.
¿En cuál Europa queremos vivir?
In which Europe do we want to
¿Queremos
live?
la paz,
Do we want
el
peace,
Estado de Derecho, los derechos de
rule of
participación
law,
democrática,
rights of
la diversidad de
democratic
opiniones y la
participation,
libertad
diversity
artística?
of opinions,
¿O queremos
and artistic
condiciones
freedom,
dictatoriales
or do we want the
en encerrados corsés
dictatorship
nacionalistas?
into
Queremos enfrentarnos
close
a la complejidad de
nationalist
nuestras
frames?
realidades
We want to
e intercambiar diferentes
approach the
opiniones,
complexity.
o
Do we
queremos
want to approach
separarnos
the
y
complexity of our
conformarnos con
realities, or
declaraciones
else do we want to
simplistas y
separate and
demagógicas?
conform ourselves with
En
simplistic and
Alemania, la historia ha demostrado los efectos devastadores
in Germany,
de la
history has
política
proven
cultural,
devastating
si así
effects
se
of
la
a
pudiese
cultural
llamar,
policy, if we
de los
can
nacionalsocialistas.
call it that, of
Aún hoy
National
podemos seguir
Socialists.
aprendiendo las
Still today,
lecciones
we may
de
still
esa época
learn
nefasta.
the lessons of that
No debe ser
nefarious
tarea de la
period.
política cultural,
Cultural
ni de la
policy
nacional
shouldn't,
ni de la
and
europea,
also
dar forma al arte y a la
national or
cultura.
European,
Su tarea
to
debe
shape art and
limitarse
culture.
a proporcionar las
Its
condiciones
task
básicas
is to
necesarias
provide the basic
para que los
conditions
artistas
necessary
puedan
for artists
trabajar,
to work,
podamos trabajar libremente. Vivimos
in
en una
freedom.
época
We'll
en la que las
live in a
noticias
period
falsas,
in which
las
fake news,
y las emociones nocivas se difunden rápidamente
toxic
a través de
emotions
los
propagate
así llamados
through the
medios de comunicación social,
social
y en
media,
la que los
so-called
votantes de
social
ciertos
media, where
partidos de
voters of
derecha
certain right-wing
reaccionan
voters
con denuncias calumniosas
right-wing
en lugar de
parties
basarse en
respond with
argumentos teóricos y hechos científicamente sólidos.
calumnies instead of
Es
based
un
scientific facts.
peligroso
This is a
fenómeno
dangerous
contra el
phenomenon
cual debemos encontrar
against which
estrategias
we should
conjuntas.
find joint strategies.
En septiembre de
In
este año
September
hicimos un
2021,
largo viaje
we
organizado
went
por
through a
el
long
programa de
journey
educación
organized
cultural
by the
de la
Program for
Akademie der
Cultural
Künste
Education of the Academy
y
of
el
Fine
archivo
Arts
Walter
and
Benjamin
the Walter
con
Benjamin
colegialas
Archive with
berlinesas tras las huellas del filósofo
students of
Walter
Berlin
Benjamin
following the
en
traces
tren
of Walter
hasta
Benjamin
Portbou, en
by
España,
train
donde Walter Benjamin se suicidó
to Portbou,
huyendo de los
where he committed
nacionalsocialistas en la noche
suicide,
del 26
escaping from the
al 27 de
Nazis in
septiembre
the
de
night
1940.
of 26 September,
Walter
27
Benjamin
September
no pudo salir de Europa a
1940. He
tiempo.
couldn't
Las
escape
riquezas
Europe and
culturales,
make it in
los tesoros
time.
de la Biblioteca Nacional de
The
París,
treasures of the
el
National
material
Bibliothèque
de
of Paris,
investigación para su obra, pasajes,
his richer
lo
material for
retuvieron.
his Passagenwerk,
Así lo describió el
kept him
historiador
there.
Gershom
That
Scholem
so
en su recuerdo de
said
Walter
Gershom
Benjamin.
Scholem in his memories
Scholem
of Walter
escribió,
Benjamin. Scholem
La
wrote,
preocupación por
the
su obra
concern
determinó
for
de
his
alguna
work
manera todo el
determined
último
somehow
periodo de vida
the whole
de
late
Walter
period
Benjamin
of
a
Walter
partir de
Benjamin
1927.
after
Esto también contribuyó, por ejemplo,
1927.
a
That
que nunca
contributed
realizara
also
el plan
to the fact that he
que muchas
never
veces estuvo a punto de
realized the
realizar, a saber,
plan
viajar a Palestina,
to
donde
travel
podría
to
haberse
Palestine,
quedado
where he
y
could
pudiese haber sobrevivido.
have
En cualquier caso,
stayed and survived.
el deseo de terminar su obra
But the
según la visión que
wish
tenía en
to
mente
end his
siempre se
work
lo impidió.
according to his plan avoided it.
A veces
Sometimes
recibía un
Gershom
telegrama
Scholem
suyo
wrote,
que decía:
I would
"Voy a
receive
venir
a
a
telegram
Palestina en
from him
barco el
saying,
1 de
I'm
diciembre
coming
de
to
este
Palestine the 1st
Nunca
of December
apareció.
this year. He never showed
Final de
up.
esta cita.
End of quote.
En septiembre de ese
In
año, con las
September of
colegialas,
that year, with this year, with
pudimos
students,
cruzar
we
las fronteras entre Alemania, Francia
may
y
be able
y
to
España
cross the
sin
borders
obstáculos.
between Germany, France,
Algo
and
que no era
Spain
posible
without
en la
any
época de Walter
obstacle. That
Benjamin.
wasn't possible
Estas
in
fronteras fueron
Benjamin's
el final
period.
de
Those
muchos
borders
exiliados
were the end
durante
of
la
many
ocupación
exiles
nazi.
during the
Los
Nazi
colegialas de
occupation.
eran
Berlin
conscientes
students
de la libertad de la que
were
gozaban. Ninguna frontera
aware
las
of the
detenía.
freedom they
Pero
were
también eran
enjoying. No
conscientes de que
border
esta
could
libertad
stop them. But
puede
they
volver a
also were
perderse
aware that
si no la
that
defendemos
freedom could be
activamente
lost if we
para
don't
toda
defend
Europa.
it actively,
Las
proactively
jóvenes también
throughout
pensaron
Europe.
en los muchos que abandonan
They
sus
also
países
thought
en
about
busca de
the
seguridad
so many
y de
people
una posibilidad
escaping
para sobrevivir,
from the countries
y
to
a los que se les
survive
rechaza
and
en
that
las
are
costas de Europa.
repelled in Europe, on European
Deseo
coasts.
profundamente que
My
Europa se convierta en un
deep wish
continente
is Europe to
abierto,
become an open
cuyos tesoros
continent
culturales puedan ser
where
compartidos por todo aquel
its
que lo
cultural
desee.
treasuries can be
No
shared with
olvidemos
whoever wants to
a los que luchan
enjoy
desesperadamente
them.
por la
We shouldn't
supervivencia en
forget
las
those
fronteras
who
de Europa.
fight for
Pienso en el drama que se
survival on the
desarrolla
borders of
en la
Europe.
frontera
I'm
de
thinking of
Bielorrusia
the
con Polonia.
terrible
También pienso en
drama
numerosos trabajadores
in
locales
the
afganos
Belarusian
que no
border,
recibieron
but
ayuda
also
tras la
the
llegada
Afghan
de
workers
los
that
talibanes al poder.
weren't helped, the interpreters
pasa a
that
Europa,
weren't
dirán
helped when the
ustedes,
Taliban
pero
seized
no,
power.
nos
That
concierne,
doesn't
porque
has
son
to
los
do
gobiernos
with Europe,
europeos,
you would
nuestros
say. No,
gobiernos,
it has to do because
los que provocan
our
estas
governments
injusticias y
provoke
desigualdades.
those
Es decir, que esto nos atañe.
injustices and
Podríamos
inequalities.
nombrar
It has to
muchos
do
más
with us. We
ejemplos,
could
ustedes lo saben.
name more examples, you know.
Los primerísimos
The
objetivos de
very
esta alianza
first goals of
son
these
la
alliances
solidaridad y
are
la defensa de la
solidarity and the
libertad
defense of
artística.
artistic
Para
freedom.
lograrlos,
To
tenemos que
achieve them, we have to
fortalecernos mutuamente.
strengthen each other. To that goal, we have to work together. That's why we founded the Alliance of Academies in Berlin in October 2020. That was my dream, since my fellow members of the Academy voted myself as the president. This Alliance of Academies that comprehends more than 50 European academies. This alliance that today is in Madrid, and through the internet, thanks to the Circle of Fine Arts, to which I'm so very thankful. This is something that we want to go on in the future. This alliance appears locally in every European country. At the end of October, last October, we were in Budapest. There we spoke about how language changes when a country goes towards an exacerbated nationalism. We were there where our house was the Society of Hungarian Authors, and next April we will be in Krakow in the island of Sus, and we are also related permanently to each other permanently through the digital space. An important part of our work is the funding of artistic, transnational artistic projects. And that's what we're doing now. Because with our works, we dream of a Europe, how it should be. We develop different visions, spaces where that in a second step may become realities through specific facts. To achieve that united and open Europe that we dream of, we need the arts, because the arts are memory of humanity. They they preserve the past, the preservation in the Hegelian meaning, in a dialectical sense, to preserve and overcome at the same time. They give us a future of the future we will share. To keep alive Europe as a transnational, peaceful project is a constant challenge. This Europe is an unfinished project, a dream of democracy and justice that we are already contributing to. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Jeanine Meerapfel, presidenta de la Academie de Künste.
Much, Jeanine Meerapfel. Now we are going to give the floor to Miquel Iceta, Minister of Culture and Sports. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, President of Círculo de Bellas Artes, President of the European Academy in Berlin, Arts of Berlin. Thank you very much, friends. Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation for becoming a part of this European Alliance of Academies. I read the manifesto that was approved in Berlin in 2020. Manifesto that I could subscribe totally, and I do it. I totally agree with that. And today, it's absolutely actual, is absolutely perfect for the days of today. The strength that brought into alive this kind of European Alliance of Academies is the strength of the arts, of culture, of freedom, the spirit of cooperation, and also this European and Europeist will that I share. We just need to go to the texts, to the laws that governs the European Union, if we want to find those elements that would explain why is it important to have this kind of initiatives. For example, Article number 2 in the Union Treaty after the Lisbon Treaty. We could read something similar like the Union is going to be based on values like dignity, respect to the dignity of human beings, democracy, equality,
y respeto de los derechos
state of law,
humanos,
democracy, and respect to human
los
rights,
derechos de las personas
including the rights
pertenecientes a
of people
minorías.
that are belonging to
Estos valores
minorities.
son comunes a
Those
los
values
Estados
are common
miembros
to member
en una
states
sociedad
in
caracterizada
a
por el
society that is going to be
pluralismo,
characterized by
la no
pluralism,
discriminación, la
non-discrimination,
tolerancia,
tolerance,
la justicia, la
justice,
solidaridad
solidarity,
y la igualdad entre mujeres
and
y
equality
hombres.
between men and women.
Esto somos, esto queremos
This is
ser,
what we are, this is
esto
what we
queremos
want to be,
construir.
and this is what we want to
Y
build.
este conjunto de valores
And
compartidos
this
por
group
todos
of
los países
shared
y ciudadanos
values
europeos
by all
constituye la
members, all
base de
countries
la
and all
cultura
European
europea.
citizens is the base
Una
of the
cultura
European culture.
que no es algo
A
inmóvil,
culture that is not something
sino
that
un
is
espacio abierto,
static. It's an
en
open space,
movimiento y en
it's moving
crecimiento.
and it's growing.
Podemos hablar de
We
culturas
could talk about
europeas
European
en
cultures
plural, pues
in a
sobre esa
plural
base
way,
de valores
because this is
compartidos
the
se
same
edifican un conjunto
shared
de
values,
culturas
and
nacionales,
upon these
regionales,
values we
locales,
create this kind
que
of national,
constituyen
local
entre
and
todas
regional
un cuadro
cultures
rico,
that
plural y
create with
diverso.
all of them a very diverse and rich
Compartimos valores,
cultural context.
historia y
We share
tradiciones,
values,
pero
history and
también
traditions,
compartimos y
but we also
celebramos
share and
la
celebrate
diversidad, la riqueza
diversity,
y la variedad de
richness,
culturas y
and
lenguas.
variety of languages and
Cultura en
cultures.
Europa es sobre todo
Culture in
un
Europe
espacio de
means
convivencia, de libertad
space of
y de
living together,
tolerancia.
freedom and tolerance.
Si hablamos, como se nos invita a hablar hoy,
Today we
de
are
cultura
invited to talk about
transnacional,
transnational culture,
hemos de entender
and if we
y
want to talk
defender
about it,
la
we
riqueza
should
y la
understand
diversidad
and
de la
defend
cultura,
richness and
las
diversity
culturas
of culture,
europeas,
of
si lo
the European
prefieren.
cultures, if you
Una
prefer.
riqueza y una diversidad
This
que
richness and
solo
diversity
tienen
that is
sentido
only
entendidos como una
logical, it
potencia
means
de
something
crecimiento
only if we
y
understand
no
that as
como una
a
herramienta
power
de
of growth
confrontación.
and not as a tool of
La
confrontation.
diversidad, el
Diversity,
pluralismo, la
pluralism,
convivencia nos
this
enriquecen
idea of
como
living together
ciudadanos
will enrich us
europeos
as European
y esa
citizens,
diversidad
and this diversity
constituye uno de nuestros valores
is one of the
fundacionales.
primary values
Entre todas y
for
todos
all of
hemos de
us. So
trabajar por una
among all
cultura
of us and between all
compartida,
of us, we should work towards a
transnacional,
shared culture,
sin
transnational
fronteras,
cultures,
una cultura
with no
capaz de
borders,
integrar la
a culture that
diversidad,
should be able to
de
integrate
entender lo
diversity,
local
to
y de
understand
proyectarse
local, and to
hacia lo
project
universal,
itself to universal,
huyendo de cualquier
fleeing from any
identitarismo.
kind of identity,
Poner, por tanto, las
identitarism.
herramientas para la libre
So
creación
to have all
creativa,
these tools for
para la colaboración
freedom in the creation
transnacional,
of arts and
para
the
la
transnational
creación
collaboration,
compartida,
also shared
para que las
creation.
barreras sean solo las de la
So
imaginación,
the only
es
barriers that
una
we'll have will be the
obligación,
barriers of
una
imagination, and this is
urgencia y una
something that is
necesidad.
totally compulsory.
En un
It's a
momento en
need
que
and it's
valores
an
que todos
urgency.
pensábamos
So
consolidados,
nowadays we
como
think
la
that all
libertad de
those values
expresión
were
o la
totally
libertad
consistent,
artística,
like for example freedom
parecen
of expression
seriamente
or freedom
comprometidos
of
en
arts,
demasiados
and now
lugares.
this looks like
Es más
it's not
importante que
so
nunca
sure. So
entender
now
y
it's more
defender
important than
que la
ever
cultura
to
europea
understand
es a
and
la
to
vez
defend
local
that
y
the
transnacional,
European culture is
federal
at the same time
y
local
federante,
and transnational,
unida
federal
y
and for
unificadora.
federations,
Una cultura que
united
puede
and for
hundir
union.
sus raíces
This
en un
culture has
territorio,
its roots in
pero que se
territories
expande más
that
allá
is
de sus
expanding
fronteras.
itself
Una cultura
beyond
que
borders,
además
and this
nunca
culture
puede ser complaciente,
should not be
sino libre,
something
crítica e independiente.
easy, something just
La
local,
pandemia
but
ha
should be
sembrado
free
dolor y
and
desconcierto en
independent.
Europa
This
y en el
pandemic
mundo
situation
entero.
has created a lot of
Pero
fear
tenemos
and
también ante
uncertainty
nosotros
in Europe
la
and in the whole
posibilidad
world.
de un
But we have in front of us
importante
the possibility of having a
en el que
rebirth,
la
a
cultura
very
ha de
important
jugar un
renaissance,
papel esencial.
where culture should play a very
Nos
important
dicen los
role.
historiadores
Historians
que muy a
tell us
menudo las
that
pandemias han ido
quite frequently
seguidas de
pandemic
periodos
times
de
have been followed
renacimiento,
by renaissance
especialmente de
or
renacimiento cultural,
periods, basically cultural
recuperar el
rebirth,
tiempo
cultural
perdido,
renaissance, in
para
order
estar a la
to
altura de las
recover the
exigencias
lost
del momento,
time and to be
para
able
responder a las demandas de
to meet
libertad
the needs of
de
the time
nuestros
and to be able
pueblos.
to answer the needs of freedom
Dice el
from
lema
our
de la New
people.
European
So
Bauhaus,
the New European
hermosa,
Bauhaus slogan says
sostenible,
beautiful,
juntos.
sustainable and
Por eso lo
together.
he tenido que intentar traducir
Well, I
varias
wanted to
veces
translate
porque
that
los tres me
because
parecían no ir
these three
en
things
consonancia. Pero
didn't
realmente
seem to
cuando
me
uno
something like
repite
goes
estas
with
expresiones,
coherence, but
estos
when
tres
you say
conceptos,
something like this,
se
when
da
you repeat this kind of
cuenta de hasta
concepts,
qué punto
is
van
when you
unidos.
realize that
Hermosa,
all
sí,
are
porque la
together,
cultura y
beautiful,
Europa
of
son
course,
hermosas.
because culture and
Sostenible,
Europe are
sí,
beauty,
porque la
sustainable,
queremos,
of course, because
si me
if you allow me to say, we want that to be eternal, permanent, and together, because it's only together we are going to be able, how we are going to be able to build every day this kind of project. And I would add something when we talk about this concept of being together. I would say united in diversity, together with diversity and free, because we want to be who we are. We want to share, we want to build, we want to debate, we want to disagree, we want to teach and we want to learn. It's only a Europe with culture and with creation, the Europe that can be free, a Europe that is beautiful and sustainable can be a Europe that is united. So I will finish, I will end up with a kind of advice, and may this be so.
Muchísimas gracias al ministro de Cultura. Gracias a los tres intervinientes en esta mesa inicial, a los que invito al estrado. Y ahora vamos a tener una intervención inicial online, a distancia, a cargo de Christos Carras, que es director ejecutivo del Centro Cultural Onassis en Grecia. Creo que estamos preparados para escucharlo.
Good afternoon. I'm Christos Carras, Executive Director of the Onassis Cultural Center, also known as Onassis Stegi in Athens, Greece. Stegi is a division of the Onassis Foundation with a mission to produce, present, and promote contemporary creative work in a transdisciplinary mode. International collaboration is central to our strategy, and the reason I am not in Madrid this afternoon is that we are implementing an action in the framework of a Creative Europe network, Sounds Now, focusing on diversity, equality, and inclusion in contemporary music curation. It's a great example of how support for international collaboration enables the kind of transnational experimentation, critical thinking, and boundary pushing that cannot be undertaken by individual organizations. Such cooperation projects can engage with important underlying issues that are at the convergence of artistic work and politics in the broad sense, in the areas of education, research, representation, climate action, or access to public space, for example. The pooling of resources and the multiplicity of perspectives leads to a quality and range of outcomes that cannot be achieved alone. The importance of culture as a transversal sector is recognized by international policymakers. Culture may not be one of the 17 SDGs, but cultural work is essential for meeting targets in at least 14. Likewise, it is linked to almost all major EU policy areas: the green transition, the digital transformation, social cohesion, well-being. The idea of the creative economy and the central role of the arts within it is emerging as a foundation for sustainable and inclusive growth strategies globally for the 21st century. There is no doubt that working within these priorities requires resources and knowledge sharing, importantly including the forms of knowledge and understanding fostered by art. But we must be careful not to forget that our focus is on artistic cooperation. Artistic cooperation must play a role, and indeed the recognition of this role generates opportunities. But we must not instrumentalize cultural work and forget the specific value of culture and the arts. This goes beyond creative disruption, prototyping, or participation, all of which can, of course, be bona fide artistic strategies. To my mind, the unique force of art is that it brings together the senses and the intellect, free from simple instrumental logics, free to speculate and propose the seemingly impossible and reconfigure our understanding of our world. Artists create spaces that are unfortunately shrinking elsewhere for engaging with critical issues of our time: the climate emergency and climate justice, the erosion of democratic freedoms and the abuses of human rights, the bias, surveillance, and extractive power of algorithmic systems, discrimination and the continuity of colonial ideologies, to mention but a few. If the climate emergency and the COVID pandemic have taught us one thing, it is hopefully that the fundamental issues of our time are global issues that cannot conceivably be addressed within the 19th century construct of the nation-state alone. Cultural cooperation enables the creation and preservation of these spaces for shared values that can and do transcend simplistic and defensive nativist trends, enriching the visions of peace and partnership that are at the base of the European project, but also acting as a critical reflection of EU policies when they risk alienating communities. Another thing that I believe the pandemic should have taught arts organizations is how firmly we are situated within a media ecology that is marked by a shift in the directionality of media production and consumption, a disintegration of traditional centers of informational authority, and the emergence of new modes of constitution of publics and counterpublics. Cultural organizations have significant communication power in this new ecology, which is multiplied through collaboration. The transnational vision of Europe has demonstrated that it is well adapted to lead in meeting global issues. Artistic cooperation must be upheld as an integral part of this vision, but we must also defend its freedom to articulate critical perspectives that will keep its progressive potential alive, and make use of our communication power to ensure that these perspectives are heard.
Vale. Pues muchísimas gracias a Christos Carras.
Thank you,
Y ahora
Christos.
invito a
And now
subir
I
a los
invite
participantes de la, de la
the
primera
floor to
mesa,
the participant of the
propiamente
first
dicha,
panel,
a Jean-François Suñé,
Jean-François
director del Museu de
Director of the
Elvira
Museu in
Dyangani
Marseille, Elvira Dyangani also, Director of the MACBA Barcelona,
y de nuevo a
and
Jeanine
then again Jeanine Meerapfel,
Presidenta de la Academia
President of the Academy of Fine Arts, together with Manuel Gutierréz, Aragón, filmmaker,
la Real Academia de Bellas Artes
in representation of two academies, the Academy of Fine Arts of San Fernando and the Real Academia Española.
Tú siéntate. Mira. Perfecto.
¿Aquí se puede fumar?
No.
Uy, se me está yendo.
No importa. Muy bien, pues como pueden ver, el título de esta primera mesa se pregunta por la posibilidad de lograr algo así como una perspectiva transnacional de la cultura europea y cómo la cooperación entre instituciones puede lograr ese objetivo. Y para empezar esta discusión, además de agradeceros a todos vosotros vuestra presencia aquí, y estoy seguro que el diálogo será muy enriquecedor, me gustaría preguntar a la presidenta de la Academia de Künste, a Jeanine, un poco por el título de esta mesa, que fue objeto de algún tipo de debate en el seno de la Academia cuando lo estuvimos preparando, un poco también por ese verbo, ¿no? El verbo transcend, y trascender, superar, y por esa palabra, ¿no? Ese adjetivo transnacional que constituye el centro de la reflexión
reflections today. Normally, culture
se enfoca desde una perspectiva fundamentalmente nacional, regional o local. Pero ¿en qué consistiría una perspectiva transnacional y qué implica eso hacia lo nacional? Es decir, en otras palabras, ¿es posible una aproximación no nacionalista a la cultura nacional?
A non-nationalistic perspective approach to national culture possible? Jeanine, yes, the real culture is never nationalist. It goes through national borders. I think that every culture, even the most local, if it is a real culture, real art, goes beyond the nationalist. Not the national, of course, but the nationalist. Here we have an example of my old friend Manolo Gutierréz Aragón. Many years ago, I came to Spain to watch Spanish films and to bring some to Berlin. And I found Camada Negra that had a big effect because of its local effects, but also transnational. And that film came to Berlin, and it was successful, wasn't it? I awarded it to you? No, you awarded yourself because the message of the film was very clear. A certain form of nationalism or nationalist brutality had no future. And I think that it would describe what we want to do. What we want to do is, of course, respect the national. The art of a village. As long as that art doesn't state that we are the only ones, we are unique, we cannot be touched. The important thing is authenticity on the one hand and openness on the other. It's not easy. We see problems about that everywhere. But I think that what we can achieve with the alliance is to be transparent, to make those paths transparent, and I think that we also can build a digital platform for the arts in which we communicate among artists belonging to every European country.
I would like to
Thanks a lot.
Switch to English to ask Jean-François Chounier, in his capacity of president of such an important museum as Museu in Marseille. The museum has traditionally been a space linked to a national, regional, or even local conception of culture. And in this sense, Museu seems quite an exception, as it has been defined by the Council of Europe when it was awarded a very important prize in 2015 as a contemporary agora. We can see the strong commitment towards a transnational conception of culture of your museum, especially to the Mediterranean, of course, which is in the center of the philosophy of your institution. And I wanted to ask you, what political consequences do you think this philosophy of your museum has had in general, but particularly in a city like Marseille with such a strong immigrant population?
It's a big question because we start, the museum is a young museum. We opened in June 2013, and we come from precisely a national point of view because a former museum in Paris, ethnological museum called Art et Tradition Populaire, was created in the 30s and come in a big crisis, precisely, I think, because it was too limited to the French situation. And it was a crisis because it was in Paris, near the actual Vuitton Foundation, which has 1 million visitors. And at this time, the museum has less than 20,000 visitors a year, which is not a lot. And we transform it precisely in the beginning of the year 2010, 2012, opened in 2013 in a new location, Marseille, with a new concept. It was called Museum of Civilization of Europe and Mediterranean. I'm not absolutely glad with the name civilization because you can discuss it because it's too heavy for so large scope, geographical scope. But we try precisely to transcend the national scope, who was the former scope of the ethnological museum, National Ethnological Museum in France. It was it's not so clear because Mediterranean is not, as you perfectly know, evident to define. Nobody knows exactly where Mediterranean starts or when Mediterranean finished. And Europe is a little bit like that. But the idea was to ever have program about. It was the sense of the cultural agora you mentioned, cité culturelle in our language, which was precisely the idea to ever have a link between not only France but another country in the north, and in the south of Mediterranean. It was what we tried to imagine for our museum. I can give you an example. We work in a transnational scope with two other museums in Europe. The Africa Museum in Belgium, we have as us a big transformation because it comes from the very colonial point of view, probably the most colonial museum in Europe because the building was himself was a colonial museum, and the Gulbenkian Foundation in Lisbon with an exhibition we started in Marseille a few days ago. We travel after in Lisbon in March. It's called Europa Oxalá. Oxalá, the Portuguese word. I think you have in Spanish more or less the same, because at the beginning we wanted to call it Europa Inshallah, but we think it was more interesting to call in the French title Europa Oxalá, which is the idea of 21 artists coming from the former three empires. We can have some Spanish example too, but we work together with Belgium and Portugal. What are their concept of European culture? Look, it's an example of what we try to show to the audience of the museum in Marseille.
Thank you very much for this example, also very, very interesting. Ahora me gustaría preguntarle a Elvira.
Now I would like to ask Elvira, director of the MACBA, that is present as such. I want to congratulate her for her new directorship. Besides commenting on the general topic of this panel, I would like to ask you about something more specific. We met in a meeting of the European Alliance of Academies, where are some 50 institutions that want to defend the transnational notion of culture beyond nationalism, thought, and culture, but all those institutions also think that this cannot be achieved if we don't bet on an open Europe, taking into account the non-European. And when I read an excerpt of the manifesto approved in Berlin last year, where we all to which all institutions commit to. We defend the cultural diversity in Europe and our societies. We want to remember the blind spots of the conquest wars of Europe have left in the world, and the structure of colonial power is still affecting many countries. Through the arts, we support a humanism opposed to any kind of racism, violence, and discrimination. We defend human rights of those that weren't born in Europe but are searching an opportunity for survival and peaceful coexistence here. And on the basis of this excerpt, I want to ask, is it possible a cultural humanism that is not Eurocentric? And is it something to be desired? Shouldn't we abandon a cultural policy based on Europe as Europe of a unity of meaning? It's a very complex question, but I will try to very briefly approach it. It has to do what we want to do in the museum, and I want to push forward with my team. there is something fundamental while I was reading the notes of the manifesto, and it is that Europe was a colonial project. The basis of Europe, the very first members of Europe had colonies, possessions, colonial possessions. Jean-François remembers it. We had to reformulate that basis. We have to understand that the diverse Europe is about considering everybody as citizens, not some citizens and some others just migrants. We have to, if we want to really break that Eurocentric vision, we have to provincialize a bit Europe and to give meaning back to the big deal of this project is the awareness of the fragility of the way Europe wanted to define themselves. I speak of Europacisms, I would speak also of isms in local terms. If we let people coming here and understanding of diverse people, we may find an axis of union for this new meaning of Europes in plural. The United Europe has already failed. So a polyphonic platform is needed in which other ways of understanding the world are possible. That cannot be built through a denomination that would do in transnational terms what national institutions do. I want to read something I have written. I really like what Jeanine said about the elimination, not of the national, but the nationalist. A nationalist Europe is problematic if it is not able to see the blind spots, seeing Europe through codes that take us back to that colonial point of view would just amount to a failed project if we don't answer to that polyphony in a way that forces us in a critical way maybe to rethink that initial project of Europe that we already know that hasn't been successful. We cannot understand Eurocentrism. I want to support all those cities that are more than just diverse, where that dialogue between cultures establishes something more than the old Madrid, the Barcelona, the old Barcelona. We must face the dynamic living present that is not just now, but has been formulated through many generations. Marseille, Barcelona, Madrid. Many generations of individuals have created Marseille as it may be defined now. So we have to make an effort to see that plurality and put that plurality at the center of the alliance if we want to be successful. Of course, so I pick
una agregación operativa o pragmática, sino que también tiene un propósito conceptual o teórico, y nuestras reuniones eso se ve, ¿no? Cómo intentamos discutir, hablar entre todos justamente sobre estas cuestiones teóricas fundamentales para nosotros. Y ahora me gustaría preguntarle a Manuel Gutierréz Aragón, desde su experiencia,
and now I would like to ask Manuel Gutierréz Aragón in terms of the film sector, because what I think is that the film sector is perhaps, in a way, like an exception to this kind of fragility or to this kind of problems that we are seeing, because from the historical point of view, maybe it has been built in a less nationalistic way, thanks to strong international connections or co-productions between different countries and the international dimension promoted by festivals, the Berlinale, for example. And I would like to ask you, do you think that the experience of this film sector
puede servir quizá de
serve
guía o de
maybe as
ejemplo
an
para
example
otros
or a guide
sectores
for
de la
other
cultura
sectors,
europea
for other
que por su
branches of
naturaleza
European
son más
culture which are
manipulables en
more
sentido nacional o
susceptible to
concebibles
manipulation or
de manera
more
nacionalista.
susceptible to a
¿Qué
nationalistic
opinas?
conception or
Pues sí, la
manipulation?
verdad
What
es
do you
que
think?
el cine como
Well, it's true
necesita para
that because
existir
the
saltar
film
fuera
sector
de las
needs
fronteras,
this kind of
pues
going
se
beyond
aprovechó
borders,
enseguida
so
de las
we have been
ventajas
always
que
taking into
podía
account
ofrecer la Unión Europea.
all the advantages of the European
Pero vamos,
Union. But,
por continuar un
well,
poco
just to go
el
on
hilo que
with
ha
this
empezado
thread started
Jeanine
by Jeanine Meerapfel,
me gustaría remontarme un poco
I would
a
like to
la
go
época
back to
de
the
Camada
times
Negra,
of
que
Camada
ahora
Negra,
quizá se
that
repite
maybe now
en
is
otros sitios, en nuestro
going to be
país
repeated
mismo,
in
¿no?
our
Con
country or in different
identitarios
places with
muy
this kind of
fuertes, muy
identitarian
nacionalistas, en el peor
events,
sentido de la
very
palabra
nationalistic in the
nacionalista.
worst sense of the
Y
nationalist
Jeanine me ha hecho
concept. And
recordar
Jeanine made
que
me
justamente
remember that
gracias a la
thanks to
solidaridad
the solidarity
de otros
of
cineastas, en
other
este caso a través
filmmakers,
del
in this
Festival de
case
Berlín,
through the
eso
Berliner
nos
Festival,
ayudó a salir
that was a
adelante
great help
a
to
países
us
que en
to
aquel
be able
momento
to go
teníamos
to
todavía
other
problemas
countries
con el
that at that moment and nowadays even we have this
con
kind
los
of
restos
problems
del
with
fascismo.
authoritarianism,
Como el
with this
fascismo
fascism.
va y viene y emerge,
Fascism comes and
aparece
goes,
con otros
fascism
nombres,
emerges and
identitarios
creates this kind
populistas,
of
ahora se dice
identitarian or populist
populismo, pero
movements.
en
Now we are
realidad
saying
me recuerda
populism,
mucho
but
aquello,
in fact
¿no?
it's very similar to what we had before.
De
It reminds me
aquello
to
logramos
that time.
salir, entre
And at that time we were able to go out thanks to the solidarity of the filmmakers coming from other countries that were offering
bueno, pues
well,
que había un truco, por decirlo de
it
alguna
was
manera. Tú tenías una película
like
que tenía problemas,
way out.
que
If you
tenía
had
de
a
censura,
movie that was
pero si ibas a
facing
un festival,
problems,
como era en este
if
caso el
you
Festival
go
de
to a
Berlín
festival, like in that
y
case
Camada
the
Negra,
festival in
pues,
Berlin, la Berlinale,
si vas
with
a un
Camada
festival,
Negra,
el festival
if
tenía
you
a su
were
vez
going to
otro
that
truco,
festival, the festival
que
had
era
also
que no se
another way
podían
out.
pasar
That was that
películas que hubieran sido censuradas.
they
Dice,
could
no,
not show
está
movies that
censurada, aquí no viene.
had been
Entonces,
censored.
la autoridad competente
So
te
the
dejaba
competent authority
que la
allowed
película pasara
you
íntegra en ese festival,
to
en ese
go
momento.
with
Eso
your
no
movie
significaba
totally,
luego
I mean,
otra
full
cosa.
movie
Entonces, la
at that
película se pasaba
festival. So
allí
the
íntegra,
festival was
y cuando
showing
volvía
that
aquí, tú
movie,
decías,
and then when
hombre,
we
¿cómo
came
van
back,
a poner
and
cómo
they
van
were
a
saying
censurar
like,
una película
how
que
we're
han
going
visto
to
los
censor a
alemanes
movie that the
entera,
German
aquí
people
los
have been able
españoles
to
no la
see, and
podemos ver
here in
entera.
Spain we cannot
Y
see that
entonces,
movie in
bueno, era una manera
full movie, the
europea,
full extent.
internacional
So this was
y
the
astuta
European or
de
international way,
combatir
a
los restos
very
del
smart
autoritarismo
way
que había en ese momento
to
en
face this
España,
kind
porque
of
ya había
authoritarianism
una
that we
democracia,
had at that
porque había
time in Spain.
censura.
Although we had democracy, we had a lot
Bueno,
of
pues eso sirve seguramente para
censor
otros países y otros
Spain. And probably
momentos
this
que están atravesando
might be useful for other countries that are
parecidos, ¿no?
facing similar
En que la solidaridad
problems now,
de los
because
cineastas,
solidarity of
ahí
filmmakers
tiene que verse, aquí esto se llama el poder
means
del arte,
something.
pues
This
tiene
is
que
the
verse
power
el
of
poder del
arts,
arte,
and this is what we have to see, the
aunque
power of
muchas
arts.
veces es ignorado por los
Despite
gobiernos,
sometimes this is
al
ignored
final
by governments,
algo de mella,
at the end
por
of
lo
the
menos hay que
day,
intentarlo.
this means something,
Ya
or at least we should
paso
try it.
a lo que
Now,
estaba realmente
I go
preguntando,
to
que
your
era
question
sobre
that
las
was
maneras que tiene el
regarding
cine
the
para
ways of
traspasar
the film
las
sector to
fronteras, en este
go
caso,
beyond borders,
europeas.
in this case the European borders.
Bueno, está muy bien hablar de eso porque
it's fine to talk about this because
ya sé que aquí
in a specific example, for example, sometimes I'm quite concerned with these big statements that we repeat, and I know that those statements are needed because we have to go to media, and the media should talk to governments, and we have to repeat all those ideas. But we should go to the specific, and in the case of filmmakers and film sector, and when we talk about going beyond borders, we have this kind of precedent that was called Max. We have several examples of this, but I'm going to talk about just one, just to give an example, in terms of talking of what can we do.
El proyecto
Urimax project
en que haya películas europeas.
It's about having European movies.
Yo no creo mucho
I do not believe so much in this unique European culture. This is totally impossible because Europe is, well, Europe has a lot of languages, a lot of different and specific cultures, so it's difficult to have just one European Union or just one European movie, because one of the things that we have, all the creators and filmmakers, is the Euro puzzle. I mean that this becomes like a kind of invent in order to get money from the European institutions and to create something that is not existent at all. It's a kind of puzzle that means nothing. So those who created Eurimax is a creation by the European Council, not the European Union, but the European Council. Because the European Council is something more, something a little bit bigger than this Europe that was born from carbon and steel. So I'm going to give this example of Eurimax among many other examples that we have. And Eurimax means that we have at least 2 European filmmakers, and instead of doing just one movie with, for example, if a person has a cousin in Poland, and then we have this kind of actress, and the actress comes here and buys something in Canary Islands. No, this is not the way. The idea is to have a movie, the movie that you want, with different founders, different producers from different countries in Europe. And for us, for filmmakers, I mean, we are coming from our own countries or regions, France, Italy, and we have some advantages if we want to do a movie. And what we want is our arts to go abroad, or works to be seen. So Eurimax is just for that, for our movies, for our arts, for our works to go abroad, to travel, and not to lose this kind of national identity. And it's not a question of having a cousin somewhere in order to justify that you are going there and someone is coming here. And this was, I mean, this worked well. It was working more or less well. It was more or less okay, with some problems, but it was more or less okay. And now we have something new. Before we have screens, and now we have platforms. And this, I mean, platforms are going also to be affected by that. I'm talking about Netflix or HBO or different platforms. And I'm going to say it right now that this works enough well to be imitated by different institutions. What I wanted to say is that it's not the same as the European Union in terms of politics, because in Eurimax we have 40 countries. So more countries than the countries of the European Union, because sometimes when we talk about this kind of things, it looks like if we were talking about the European Union borders, but in Eurimax we have other countries. For example, Argentina is part of Eurimax as an associated country, or Switzerland, for example, that is not a country, is not a member of the European Union. So I think this kind of Eurocentric, dangerous part that we have always in these meetings that we are having here is like, we have Canada, for example, in Eurimax. So I think that it's a very interesting concept of the power of arts, and as we are talking about this idea of going or skip borders, it would be nice also to go beyond the European national borders. Yes, why don't we talk about this kind of cultural policies or European institutions? I would like to ask you, Jeanine, about your opinion, your sincere and honest opinion. Do you think that in the European institutions, and I'm not talking only about the EU, but also the Council of Europe, do you think that they really want to have this kind of transnational European cultural policy? Do you think that they think that culture is just something that matters to locals or regions or things like that? Do you think that this European cultural policy will be made from below, from civil society, without counting on the political power? Do you think this is possible? Wow, what a question. Well, in terms of what you were saying, Manolo, I think it's really important to say that the last thing that we want is to have this kind of big European sauce where everything is the same. This is not possible. This is not the vision that we have in terms of arts. Arts is always individual, is personalized, is deeply individual, and is deeply local. So we are not talking about doing something like this, but we are talking about the possibility of helping each other in moments of danger. when we are at risk of not having this freedom of expression. And we are also talking about, for example, everything that is happening with the film sector. That is something important to me, the same as for Manolo. All the things that are happening with the film sector, when we want our movies to go abroad, to travel, but to be accepted as local and as something special, this is very difficult because we have all the resources, we have all the Netflix against us, creating this kind of very complicated sauce. To be out of this means to be authentic, and if we want to be authentic, we have to have money, and this is not easy. So this is a fight that we are fighting now, the kind of fight that we are fighting as actors or actresses or filmmakers, as people that are doing art. But in the Alliance, we are doing something different. In the Alliance, we are trying to defend ourselves from these attacks that are coming to us. And I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No.
Do you want me to say something else? So if you allow me to say this, I would really be interested on talking about the Mediterranean and the Contemporary Museum of Arts in Barcelona. We are talking about regions with very specific structures, and I think that this is also a wonderful thing that we have, that they have this kind of special structures. We are not saying that all this should be just one thing. Not at all. It's just the opposite. So would it be possible if you could tell us something about your work? Because, I mean, I can tell you, I do movies. I'm a filmmaker, and I would like my movies to travel, my movies to be seen. And I fight for that with other colleagues and women that are in the same thing. So, could you tell us something about your work? Oh, yes, for sure. Well, I tell stories in a different way. Museums are like the guardians of objects or the guardians of histories. And I was listening to you before, and I was thinking on a sentence that I usually use, and also my colleague said that artists are able to tell the stories, or they are better equipped to tell the stories better than historians, and they tell the stories not in the way it happened, but in the way it was felt. So in that sense, museum is like a movie where the person goes inside the movie, and I really hope that we are able to act with a program that creates or generates a critical thought, that creates an experience and also relationships that would have an effect on the external world. I think that this is something, when you were talking, Manuel, if this was happening in the film sector, and probably if we do not have the audience, if we don't have the spectator, if we do not have the person that is going to visit the art, this is not going to happen, because the person creates also the discourse. And this possibility of having each member of the audience or each spectator to have this kind of relationship that the person creates with a work of art, this is unique. We should be like invisible even as platforms. In my opinion, a courageous Europe would be a Europe that would create a platform where all those cultures would create a dialogue with other cultures that are also there. We were mentioning before the importance of all the migrants and immigration, and the stories that we tell in museums are like an answer to that, because this allows you to go there, to go in depth, and sometimes it's not easy to do that in the film sector, because cinema that I really love, I love movies, and I really like to see the movies because it brings me to different worlds or different even areas of life that are really hard. It's very difficult for us to go to these areas by ourselves. In that sense, movies are really a great help. So, and we see how people are able to break this vulnerability in order to show us this kind of blind spots that you were mentioning before. And in my opinion, the museum does that, creating this kind of relationships, this kind of dialogue, and doing it in a way where this meeting with the other, that could be a spectator or could be one of us, is also created. And in that sense, I think that we share that. We are doing basically the same in the sense of transcending the local or the national. And the context also is very important. And this context is merged, is created, is infused with all those relationships, and I think this is really important. The museum that I would like to have is this kind of museum where everything happens with kind of order or with kind of theater taste, and also chaos is very important in my opinion. And in that sense,
also asking in the same line, Jeanine was suggesting to Elvira, in the case of Museu, no? I have the impression that being a museum of society, in a way, it is maybe easier for a museum as yours to transcend this national point of view rather than what happens in the visual arts sector. And also, I wanted to ask you, because I've seen that your institution has built very strong bonds with academic institutions, with research institutions, which is a sector, the one of research, university, that has transcended the national paradigm many, many decades ago. Do you think that this alliance with the sector of research, of university, is also helpful for cultural institutions in order to achieve this transnational standpoint?
I think so, because in France, we have, because of the creation of the Ministry of Culture by André Malraux in the beginning of the 60s, we had a strong cut of the links from university to museum, because university was Ministry of Education, museum is, of course, in the Ministry of Culture, and we have to restore links we was existing before. In ethnology, in our field, it was evident that university and museum have something to do together, and we try to restore not only in a national basis, but also with a university, for example, for North Africa. We have a strong relationship with Tunisian universities, Moroccan universities, to have researcher inside of our institution for a long period, not a sort of super Erasmus, which has its qualities, but it's not the solution of every question. Are having some researcher for a long period, 1 year, sometimes 2 years, inside of the museum staff, of the museum team. And I wanted to say something about the population of immigration question. In Marseille, you speak about that. It's very sensible. Probably you don't know, but there is an inquiry, recent inquiry was done in the whole France about the links with Algerian population. We have in France more than a third of the general population who has a link with Algerian. Not only Algerian-born people, of course there is a lot, but also so-called European people coming after the independence of Algeria in '62. Or the very strong, very difficult question of the Harki, what we call it Harki, was the Algerian troops. We were engaged in the Algerian, in the French side during the Algerian war. And in Marseille, is more than a third, is probably more than half of the general population of inhabitants of Marseille. Marseille is 900,000 inhabitants, but probably half of the population have something to do with Algeria. And for us, it's a very important question to speak, not to speak as can speak a politician or TV or let's say, but to restore the knowledge of long-term history. We were doing that because I think it's very important, because for a lot of French people, Algeria started in 1830, in the conquest of Algiers. There was not a land before. It was absolutely untrue. For example, you know, as the Spanish, that Carlos Quinto was trying to do something in Algiers, but nobody knows in France. The history starts with the conquest, or sometimes the history starts with the independence war, as the Algerians say. Donc we have to restore this. We have done a big exhibition 4 years ago. It was called Made in Algeria. The subtitle was Genealogy of a Territory. We tried to explain what type of construction of the country is Algeria. We are preparing for next year a big exhibition, not only an exhibition, also symposium, colloque, and so on, about Abdelkader. Abdelkader was the big figure of rebellion against the French army in the 19th century. But after that, Abdelkader was a creator of the so-called Sufism in Damas. Donc we wanted to show the whole Abdelkader, which is a very key figure for Algerian people, because it's the only figure in we stay in the main square in Algiers is the Abdelkader figure, and as the rebellion chief in the 19th century. But it's important also to explain the whole story, if I'm trying to explain the whole story. And my target is to have a big Algerian event every year, because we have to understand because for the French politics, for the French society, Algerian is a key problem, a key question. But it's not only a problem; it's also a question, and we have to not to. It will be a stupidity to explain, but trying to explain, contribute to explain to precisely in Marseille, in which this question is more and more essential.
So thank you very much. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. The time was flying so quickly. I would like to thank you all for not only answering to my question, but also rephrasing them in a better way, and also make us think about the complexity, the theoretical complexity of the issues we are dealing with. So please, a big applause for them. And I kindly invite you to leave the stage. Before the next roundtable, we will have one more moment, por favor, one more moment of La Zambra Barroca, and then we will go to the second and last roundtable of the afternoon about digitalization. Por aquí, cuidado, no te mates.
Vale.
Thanks again to La Zambra Barroca for their wonderful performance. And now we come to the second roundtable and last roundtable of this afternoon about digital technologies. Its title is What Influence Digital Technologies Have on Our Understanding of Art and Politics. I please call the participants in this roundtable to the stage, and I want to introduce the moderator, Marta Peirano, journalist, who will moderate this session. Thank you very much, Marta. And please also, I would like to call Lisbeth Beek, Norbert Pals, and Cecile Basbrot to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the Círculo for hosting this interesting event and the Academy of Fine Arts for organizing it. This panel specifically is around digitalization or digital technologies, about their influence on our way of seeing the world, and also its influence on the arts and politics, and whether we have the capacity now to transform or reform them in order for them to become host of a transnational, collaborational, productional space in Europe. This is a discussion that for some years, since 2016, has been dominated by neoliberalism. Actually, digital platforms dominating technological world and communication have proven to be valuable tools for the opposite of the arts and of culture, and for the development of tools for censorship, surveillance, mass control, and have turned into tools for facilitating illiberal democracies. So now we're going to talk about the possibilities they have to do what they have done for a year and a half ago in the context of so unprecedented of the lockdown, where we have been learning, sharing as an international community on part of an intense discussion. So, to center the debate, I'm going to start with a question for each of the panelists. Since none of them, I'm going to pass, none of them speaks English, I'm going to pass to English, but first, Cecile Basbrot.
I'm sorry if I totally murdered your name. My Spanish throat has limitations. Cecile es una super premiada escritora,
a very awarded writer on literature, vocational essays, and script writer for radio. Your last novel is about digital technologies. We're going to speak about that. At the end of the panel, we have the president architect of the University of the Arts in Berlin, Nova Paltz, and the conceptual artist Lisbeth Beek from Rotterdam. She's half of the founders of the collective Beek Ponderroad. So welcome.
As I said, I'm going to start by asking each one of you a question, and I'll start with you, Cecile. So as we were saying, in the last 10 years, you've been publishing a cycle of novels, of 5 novels, like a pentalogy, that thinks about the process of art or the nature of art production. And the last of this pentalogy is interestingly called Destruction. It is a dystopian novel that describes how France becomes a dictatorship and how, among other things, it bans all kinds of art, but for entertainment. And the technologies that precipitate or that facilitate this process are not futuristic technologies. They are not unknown. They are the exact technologies that we all depend on in this moment. So I want to first ask you, how does it happen? How do these current technologies initiate the process towards a dictatorship and the censorship of the arts?
I wouldn't say in the novel that it is the technologies that are issuing this kind of dictatorship. This kind of dictatorship happened in the novel because for two reasons. The first one is a certain degree of violence which is increasing into the society and of hate, which is unfortunately what really happens. And that's why I wanted to write such a dystopical novel. And the other reason, it was it had something to do with the language and with the fact that, for instance, also in political discourses, but in every kind of discourses, the fact that language is more and more simplified. And there are a certain amount of publishers or also of literary critics who ask writers or who expect writers to write very simply, so that everybody can understand, because they imagine that if you write things a little more complex, people won't understand, and I'm sure it's not true. But, and so this was the process that made me write such a story. Then in the story, in this dictatorship, new technologies are playing a certain part, and mostly with the mobile telephone, because in this novel, people from the government, from the dictatorship, they know how to take grips upon your mobile phone and to make some applications, apps, obligatory, which is a little what we are living now. I began to write the novel, it was 5 years ago, and it was published in France, I think 2 or 3 years ago. But it's what we are experiencing now with those COVID apps, which we are obliged to load on our mobile phones. And of course, in the novel, it's extreme, it's radical. There are only those obligatory apps, so that they can control, watch whatever you are doing, and demanding you to do some things, also in the domain of art.
So it's like both things, no? The flattening of language, which we can definitely experience in social networks, mainly because of the speed, I guess, that tends to flatten the way we speak, and also the inescapable app that that surveils and follows you everywhere. And in this context, I wanted to ask you, Professor Norbert, how do you see, and of course in this debate I am expecting you to be the big defender of the technology, the digital technology space, the platforms, to be a place where we can develop a space for the arts, because you've been a big proponent of this in the Academy. So how do you see in this context where language is being flattened, privacy is being broken, and speed is pushing things in an uncomfortable way for the development of collaboration? So how do you imagine a space where all the things that require slowness and concentration and trust can be?
Well, I think to answer this question, I would like to maybe set 3 points and then come to 3 aspects on how we could achieve that. I think to be precise on the digital, I would now also talk about it as a tool to fighting a crisis. How do we use it as a tool? Because I think that's very sensible to do now. And then when I talk about the digital, I mean basically networked entities that communicate with each other. I'm not talking about a single, let's say, digital interface. And I would also try to focus it on human-human interaction, and I would like to leave out AI at the moment out of the equation. I think the 3 main points that should be done and where the digital is senseful is aspects of communication, aspects of practice, and aspects of connecting 2 analog entities via a digital interface. And for that to happen in a democratic way requires a framework in which certain ethical standards have to be followed through. And I think one aspect is to be as independent as possible from larger players that are driving technological development and are pushing certain paradigms and default user behavioral settings into the market. So I think what we have to focus on is open source and open science approaches in which we are hosting also our own data, and in which we are free to basically define the programming interfaces. And coming back to these 3 aspects, communication, practice, and the connection of let's say, analog via the digital, I think there's always a range of scale on how intense you do this. So in a moment of crisis, the digital can be very helpful, even if you have very, very small entities, small bits that are going from one place to another, just to transmit one information, even if it's just going one direction. And I think we have to really focus on under what circumstances, what scale of engagement on a technological level is necessary, and how that can be done in a way that has a very low entry level, and is protected from larger, let's say, corporations, so they cannot track our kind of behavior. So when we look at what our reality is, we can see that our smartphones and our requirements on speed and data transmission are growing and growing. And I think this is something that is driving technological development. And I think we should always be able to all dial it back and not always be kind of in parallel what is assumed to be what the state of the art is. I think defining your own state of the art in regard to the problems that arise is important. If we want to help institutions in danger that don't have access to big data connections. We need to do other stuff. But we need to be able to help them to get their information out so they can be sure that it's maybe triggering an activity somewhere else if they cannot perform in their country. And as an example, for example, when Kirill Serebrennikov was incarcerated, he was still able to maintain some form of communication, which was very elementary, but was enough information to orchestrate a theater play outside of Russia. And I think it's important to think about these kind of range of technological engagement and not to be driven by what is assumed to be the state of the art that is the thing we have to follow. We need to be in control as much as possible, and the tools at which we are working are open and accessible for everyone, and they don't put high barriers to people who want to participate. The higher the barrier, the more people we exclude. And I think this is a very critical aspect. We can develop the most fancy and effective tool, and if it's not, if you don't have on the other side somebody who can use it, who doesn't have the infrastructure, then it's senseless. It needs to be on the primitive level, and then you can dial it up. But this is, I think, the thinking we need to do.
So when you talk about levels, I assume like you mean like the code of entry, like the moderation of the space, that it would have to be very relaxed, which is an interesting problem because moderation is like the biggest problem that digital platforms have today, and the place where they apparently invest most of their resources, paying human moderators and developing AI moderating tools, etc., precisely to manage this kind of problem. Though I don't know if I got you right when you're talking about like avoiding this kind of infrastructures, if you're maybe proposing something similar to a mesh network between cultural institutions. So let me hold that thought, because I want to ask Lisbeth, you, in your work at the collective, one of the things that you do is you explore the affordances of public space. Affordance being, of course, the password these days for everything: design, architecture, software, etc. And one of the things you explore is how to activate events and how to incentivize communication and collaboration between artists or partners in these spaces. And from your production, I have the idea that you are biased towards the physical, that you feel there are better conditions in the physical space where bodies meet. But I would assume in the last year and a half, you all have been thinking a lot about the affordances of the digital space. So what would be the maybe qualities that we could maybe build in a digital space for the arts that we don't find in the physical ones?
Yeah, I had to look up affordances, to be honest, and in what ways that would sort of resonate with the work that we do. The question you ask, how to build digital spaces in such a way that they can maybe
what would be the conditions
we would
have to set up?
I think it's a very difficult question. Now, recently I looked at Zuckerberg, who was promoting Metaverse, and I don't know if you saw that movie on YouTube, where the conditions that he sort of built were trying to sort of create a replica of the physical environment, completed with senses like touch and smell, and you know, as if you are present and close to each other in the same space, no? Even if you're far away from each other. And of course, I wasn't with him in that YouTube film, so I cannot really get to that point somehow. So it stayed a spectacle. But you know, I'm not sure that I'm too much in favor for the physical. You said like you defend the physical. I'm not so sure. I'm really interested in how the digital tools influence our public realm. Know what that does to our communication, what it does to how we deliberate, how we discuss, what it does to property, and what it does to how people can live together in a city, and if they can live together, and if I can sort of exemplify that with a sort of example. Jos and me, my partner, we worked in San Francisco, and we were asked by the museum, the SF MoMA, the Modern Art Museum, and the library network to think about what public knowledge is, and if we could create a project that would be a response to that. And I think we talked with them for maybe the curators for maybe a year via Skype at that time. Zoom didn't exist yet, or we weren't aware of it. So this was like 2018, pre-COVID, no? And the influence of Silicon Valley on the circumstances of people living and working in that city are immense, and in such a way that we were wondering in what way does citizenship still hold in this relatively small city like San Francisco, where huge influx created immensely rising housing prices and divisions between people, etc., etc. No, this is all very big. It was so big that we thought, how can we actually unpack, let's say, these issues in such a way that we can actually talk about them? No, can we sort of drop the large problems just in front of our public or in front of ourselves? If you talk about inequality, that's huge, no? How do you do that? So we ran by coincidence, or by, I would say, coincidence steered by research, into a model that was built in the time of the New Deal, so in the 1930s, very physical model, 15 by 15 meters. That was built by carpenters, made of wood, and it was an exact copy of the city of San Francisco. And when we found that model, or when we heard about that model, we didn't touch it yet, but when we heard about that model, we thought this is really a great tool to talk about the city, while we can sort of almost hold the city, no? As an object, but to sort of be able to talk through that object about the issues that are at stake in such a city. And I talked about San Francisco, but I think this is just a lens. No, we can take any other example of cities where these kind of similar things are happening. So we embarked on a process of finding that model from a warehouse, cleaning the model, from 30 years, no more, 50, 60 years of dust, because it had been built in the 30s, like I said. Then it was exhibited on Treasure Island. Then it was exhibited in the City Hall in 1942. And then it was packed because the war started and they were recruiting soldiers and needed that space of City Hall. And since then, this model never was shown anymore, and we thought, like, we want to show this model in order to talk about citizenship and the city. And then we ran into the problem that actually we could not find space in San Francisco big enough to house that model, There were spaces big enough, but the companies of Silicon Valley sometimes had parties or gatherings in the city that made it impossible to rent that space for a longer time. So there was a real issue about money and capital in that city to provide spaces where people could actually meet in a physical, gather around the model, I would say. No? So after these 3 months of cleaning, we still didn't manage to arrange that, but we had these 29 libraries. They have a huge library network in San Francisco, which I would say is the ultimate public space, where people can come in, they don't pay, it's for free, you can borrow books, yes, but you can also take a shower if you don't have a house, you can go to the toilet, you can do language courses, you can do administration, you can be administered if you are an illegal immigrant, and they can help you to find space or places or protection somehow. No? So I would say that the library is the ultimate public space. So what we eventually did as an in-between stage of this model is bringing this model to these 29 libraries in pieces. And then we gathered public people or invited people to come and to talk about that part that was bringing the neighborhood to the neighborhood. So that part was, their neighborhood was brought to the library, to gather around that model and to actually talk beyond the nostalgic, like, oh, that's my street or that's my house, but to talk beyond the nostalgic about what the issues in this city are and how they can be solved, perhaps, let's say, from all sorts of different angles. And then the model that's very physical, that's very object, and the people that gathered around it are very bodily, of course, no? They did that in a huge program of maybe 100 events in a couple of months. And I always saw that whole endeavor that we started off as some form of Facebook 2.0 or Metaverse 2.0, but in a physical manner, because I think it's really important to get together, perhaps without an agenda, in a space where you can have friction, not in a space where things are smoothed out, which is happening, I think, in social media, where confrontations are made, but let's say from bubble to bubble and not necessarily inside that bubble.
I think you're pointing out to a really, really important thing, like friction being the other buzzword of the last couple of years when talking about how we redesign the spaces, which is this idea of, first of all, of distribution. No, you were talking about the libraries who were called, I think, precisely in San Francisco, the palaces of the people, a concept I really like. But when you were mentioning, again, the avoidance of the big platforms, big tech infrastructure, you were talking about building this kind of network, no? A network that is maybe outside of the, I don't know if the internet, but definitely the social networks where all these debates are having their place these days, and creating something physically close from the interested partners, I would assume, like it would be the libraries, for instance, or in this case, the academies of art. Is this the kind of thing you're thinking about? And I have to say, like, you anticipated my next question when bringing up the metaverse, because for me, this idea of a mesh network made of cultural or art institutions that host, that create a space for artists is the exact opposite of the metaverse that is proposed by Mark Zuckerberg. And it's funny because, of course, like building a network from scratch would look exactly the opposite of what that metaverse, where you can see people and smell people and almost touch them, looks like. So I'm wondering, I would like maybe the three of you to talk about how do you imagine the aesthetics of that place, no? Because when I think about it, like, you know, I think maybe of the first IRC channels and the places where pretty much everyone I know learned to code and to build the kind of internet that we are experiencing today. So I wonder, how do you imagine this space where artists can meet and collaborate and build together? Like, how does it look like? Does it look like the metaverse? Probably not.
I think what is important is that when we conceive these spaces, we don't conceive them as, let's say, totally abstract entities. We are somewhere and we're looking at something or engaging with something. And it's quite interesting. I think it was in Barcelona a couple of years ago. They were doing experiments on the degree of empathy you could receive when you're engaging with, for example, a digital avatar. In that case, it was a VR-based entity. And it was quite interesting that although the entity you were engaging with was rather abstract, after a short period of time, you would be able to some form of create a relationship with that. And I think it is interesting to think in these concepts. Also because I think it allows us to include more people in the dialogue, because we are looking at a global network of communication and solving the issues that we have also talked about in the group before. How do we get over a Eurocentric perspective and allow more people to take part? One aspect that that I also would like to stress, and I'm very interested on this kind of edge between the analog and the digital in a kind of hybrid, uncanny zone, is that we absolutely need to develop a form of literacy to go into these really totally parameterizing aspects that are taking place now, be it blockchain, be it AI, and be it also those concepts. Because if we don't do that, they will be decided for us. And I can make a small example. I'm part of a research project that we are doing now, together with the Technical University Berlin. And they have a very elaborated, multi-dimensional simulation scheme that produces urban planning schemes. They're not done by an architect or an urbanist. They're done by a programmer. And we have to argue that what is coming out of the simulation machine is not architecture yet or urban planning yet. It is some prototypical entity, but it is very hard to really put value to the profession of culture, art, and design into a pipeline that is totally streamlined, where the cultural impact is almost a problem. And I think this is why we need to engage in a way where we value the analog, as you were saying, but we also have to be up to here into technology, to make them our own and engage with them and alter them and work with them, because else we'll be gone. I mean, we really have a problem that we have in urban planning where they're doing a Turing test, where they let people decide whether it was done by a human or a robot. And I think this is where we have to really move forward. We need to value what is the analog and what it gives us as humans, but we also have to be very, very interested in what is taking place right now. And I agree, the legal frameworks that we are looking at through blockchain and everything that is connected to this makes a big question mark to what is the legal body that is ruling a nation. And I think what my biggest, I have 3 children, and I'm very worried that the education that highlights the qualities of democracy in the schools is not good enough to comply with a global communication system in which you have people that are defining what is good and what is bad. And that combined with all this legal framework around it is a little bit scary. So I think our job would be to develop zones in which we are really controlling what is going on. We have enough understanding of what technologically is going on, and that we are starting with very simple structures that grow in complexity. I think creating complexity right now is not the problem. We can do that immediately, and also what you have mentioned, how do we control what is taking place in, for example, in these networks, is a question of complexity. So I think the reduction of complexity would be a good way forward, and from there to then grow. But we need to have, let's say, the instruments that are high-end, but are low entry. And for example, what some of our students were doing during Corona, because they wanted to be independent, was to work with a system which is called Matrix, in which you have, you control your own data sets, but you can make also networks with other institutions, and then data is shifted through that, and everybody is sharing everything, but it is not allocated with you alone. So it allows, for example, institutions in crisis to distribute their content into different networks. And it is open source, and it's also from your privacy rights safe. But this requires a certain kind of digging to be a functional alternative to what is going on, because I think we are all conservative in that way, that we are not experimenting with this and that if the other one is working well. But I'm in a way quite worried that what we are looking at has such a speed and such a momentum that it's going to really change how we are acting. At the same time, I'm an architect who was working with computers. I'm so thrilled of what artistically is possible.
Yeah, this idea that you're proposing also matches Lisbeth's idea of friction, no? I mean, if you're developing locally with the ambition to reach beyond your borders, like, you know, there will be always friction in the fringes where the two institutions or the different partners meet, and there will be different levels of technical abilities or investment or capacities or etc. And from that friction, I would imagine that protocols would have to be born. It took the internet 10 years to develop the protocols that it has now. There is a lot of debate about whether or not they work. I think they're a miracle. It's a miracle that they work so well at this point. But what would you say would be the kind of appropriate protocols for an art network or an art institutions network that has this very specific purpose and has a very low level entry, as you were saying before? How do you think they would be different? Like what would be our code to rule those frictions in between to make the collaboration productive?
Is it?
Yeah, I'm asking the three of you.
I don't know.
All of you. I mean, well, you've thought a lot about it.
Yeah, I don't know when you said something about complexity and about the building complex spaces. I'm also thinking that maybe for me, it's far more interesting to build less complex spaces with less control, because I think the issue of control is, of course, really one of the main things why you say, like, we need to become independent. And I'm not so interested in exactly how such a space would look, whether there's a chair or whether there's no chair or something, no. But I would be interested in a space, if you ask me, where artists can gather, no, that is like porous, like maybe a space a little bit like a library, no? That is porous, that is open, that is not controlled because you're not registered in order to come in, no? Otherwise, you need to, in all the other cases that we are connected to the internet in whatever way we are registered. No, we sign the protocols, the Google 1 to 10 points or something. What is it? I comply with this. You can use this. You can have my whole whatever. No, and we say yes, I agree. We always say yes, I agree, because you want to move on. No, basically. So you unlocked the door to that space yourself, but you also unlocked the door to your own space. And I think that's where I find that the smoothness comes in, because then your data are being implemented in the larger system in order to create, like you say, the more we do, the better it becomes, no, basically. So I think the messiness and the uncontrol and the porousness and the openness and the not knowing of who is there actually, nobody then, that nobody knows that exactly, I think is much more important in order to sort of create these encounters that are unexpected.
Yeah, I very like this.
I would like to go into another direction. I don't know, because I was listening to what you were saying, and I was thinking literature is different, and I would say, I don't know, maybe I could be wrong, but the difference between the digital world and the real world, it's the difference between 2Ds and 3Ds. 3 dimensions. We are living in a 3-dimensional world, and like your experience, it is a 3-dimension world, and the pure digital world is a 2-dimensional world. And I would say, maybe it's a little strange idea that literature is already a 2-dimensional world. And there is no such a difference between what could be a literary world, a real, it's difficult to speak about that, a real literary world and a digital literary world, because they are the same. They are 2-dimensionals, and the dimension of literature is already digital, you could say. And in this way, it's very different from other arts, and it is also maybe the reason why it's so difficult to imagine, but it's fascinating at the same time, how you could introduce or use those digital technologies into literature, to transform it, or just to explore what it could do in a literary world. And I just wanted also to add something, because it has to do with what you were saying. I've read a week ago an article in a French newspaper, Libération. It was about an artist from Switzerland, a theater, visual art artist, and performing art artist, who is working together with a programmator, and together with a kind of digital double of him. And this digital double was created and has been nourished for 15 years with data from the real artist, who is called Simon. So there is the Simon and the real Simon. And they are performing a theater play nowadays in, I think, in Vevey, in Switzerland. And there is an interview not of Simon, but of D. Simon. So the first interview of an artificial intelligence in a newspaper. And it's very interesting because there are some answers which are really philosophical. And there is one question about money. How do you feel, the D. Simon, you are working and you don't earn any money? And the D. Simon answers, it's not my problem because I'm working, I'm happy to work, and what interests me is exchange and communication. And it was just what you were saying, both of you in different ways. And I just wanted to tell it because I find it fascinating. Of course, we could be worried about what will come next and about those watch societies. But there is also something very fascinating in those new technologies and in the way we could use them to explore new worlds. It's a kind of revelation in its way.
I don't know if I'm really going along with this 2D, 3D separation, because looking at the technological evolution to the future, the role, for example, of the body and technology will be renegotiated. So we will have parts of us the integrity is already broken now, but I think it will be much more broken. And I think then it becomes quite hard to separate the one from the other. But what I like is, and I think this is where a very interesting challenge lies, are projects exactly like you have mentioned. They are identifying something which is very alien to us, but it is inspiring. And it reminds me of some of the artists that I was interested in. They were artists that were in the 1950s working with computers. And there's especially one, he is an Austrian artist, and he was interested by using random functions and triggering these random functions to make a certain kind of graphical output in 2D and 3D. But the idea was that, not like his colleagues that were using computers to make a more rational, almost scientific way of making art, that this kind of random, this uncontrollable entity was a bridge to some metaphysical space that he could tap into. There was a dedication to lose control, but to receive something else for that. And this kind of imbalance of our control and what is somehow played back to us was very interesting. And we see that in different variations, as you have described there. There's another example of, he's also French, François Roche. He was having a robot with an injection of material out of which he could make shingles for a roof. And this robot was made in such a way that he could listen. And he had a person who was singing to it, like religious songs. And he was building these kind of shingles out of which a building was constructed. So you have a recording entity, so the shingle doesn't become just a piece of material, it is almost like a record. And it has almost something shamanistic, because it is identifying something that is unknown but is there. And I'm quite interested in these concepts where the preconceived is breaking and where it is moving in a direction that is very modern but very old at the same time. And then we have the ability to allocate technology in the whole range of human development. And I think this is what the actual companies are doing right now. They're always trying to make it an island of innovation. But we are in a long stretch of proto-digital thinking that started in the Renaissance and came to what we are doing right now. And I think that we always have to rearrange our brain to forget what is told to us and then look what is there. And this is, I think, what our educational institutions need to really focus on, to break this kind of paradigm, this the default set. And then we are able to integrate much more stuff than what is suggested. Because what they are suggesting us are data sets that are calibrated for the application. And they are never going into the areas where it hurts or where it becomes messy or overlaying, overlaps, and so on. So what we're looking is fitness landscapes that are then mathematically searched for the perfect solution that is undisputable.
Well, I'm being warned that we are running out of time, but I must say that in this very, very little time, a lot of action has happened, at least for me, like the way I imagine this network now. Norbert, you propose something that is very physical and that is very from scratch, and that is yeah, definitely what we call a mesh network that somehow evades all the centralized logics of big tech. And I was very happy also with your idea, Lisbeth, of an exchange that mirrors the investment that you make, in the sense like a peer-to-peer kind of protocol where this much you open, this much you see, and linking that with libraries, I think, is a very good image because the network that libraries make in cities, not only among themselves, but also with the people, and the fact that they are probably the only places, apart from the market, I guess, where you can get people that are very old and people that are very young going there deliberately to spend time, makes them very special. And also, I think your story about this artist and his doppelganger is extremely amusing, but also very inspiring. Like, I wonder if there could be definitely like a mirror world where everything we know about ourselves, maybe as artists or thinkers or developers, can be learned by an entity that lives in our servers, no? And that interacts with the other doppelgangers of the other artists while we're asleep. That would be a lot of fun. Well, in any case, our time has come to an end, and I would like to ask one last thing from you, which is, if you were to describe this world with a name, and this network with a name, what would it be? One word, well, maybe two or three.
Me?
I would still call it world, probably.
You what, sorry?
I would still call it world, probably. It becomes more populated, maybe with the Simons, or likewise, no, and it will probably become more messy, but definitely, yeah.
For me, it has something to do with, it's a long time ago, what Plato called the harmony of spheres.
The
harmony of spheres.
Nice,
so
nice one.
I would.
I mean, it could be, I don't know, if we introduce a word, it immediately creates an image, and that image is different for all of us. And the question, if not rather a sign, could be something that that could be interesting, something that is maybe reducing communication on a very elementary code, which is maybe, I don't know, a sender and a receiver, two spheres and a line. Maybe there's a more, let's say, this already looks very functional. Maybe there is something that is connotated with a longer history. Maybe there is an historical sign that talks about communication, and engagement in a way that is more new to us. It's a very hard question, I think.
I know.
and I'm not so sure about Meta World, for example, because I think he took that from another novel.
Mm-hmm.
And it is also, it's introducing a hierarchy, which I don't like.
True. Well, maybe we can just stay with the harmony of spheres.
Yeah, harmony of spheres.
Newtonian fashion. And so, yes, and call it quits while winning. Thank you so much to all of you for being here, and thank you so much to the three of you for coming here to Madrid to talk about this very interesting topic. And I hope we will meet all again in not too long to know the name of this amazing network and know how it looks and how well it works.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you. You can stay for the moment, but thank you so much to all of you. Before leaving and going to eat something, because also the time requires it, I would like to thank Marta and this wonderful round table. I would like to thank all of you. Remember that tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning we have the internal sessions of the Alliance, the working groups, and all the hard work we have to do. That's also why we are here. And then tomorrow at 6 p.m. we will have the public session about this question of radicalization that is so important in order to understand why we are here and the purposes of our alliance. But now, before leaving, we'll have the chance to listen for the last time to Andreas Pritvitz and La Zambra Barroca. I would like to thank them once again because, as our president said, they really represent a little bit what this alliance stands for. They are transnational, transgenerational. They come from traditional music but go towards innovation and towards the future. So I think it was a perfect choice, and we really thank you for being here. Thanks to all of you. I leave you with La Zambra Barroca, and you can. Thank you so much.
So colorada. No me mire a la cara que me pongo colorada. Con el rico